Ryan was on his way to meet his sister, Jenny, but his mood was anything but cheerful. Despite his reluctance, a promise was a promise, and he wouldn't back out now. Once they settled into their usual booth at their favorite family cafe, Jenny immediately sensed something was off. "Ryan, what's going on? Did something happen?" she asked, concern etched across her face. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Don't worry about it. Just little problems." Jenny knew better. Whenever Ryan called them little problems, they were usually anything but. She pressed him for details, refusing to let it go until, at last, he admitted the truth. His wife, Lauren, had been overwhelmed with work, staying late at the office every evening. By the time she finally made it home, she was exhausted and on edge. As a result, they had barely been seeing each other, and it felt as if they were slowly drifting apart. "Have you asked her what's going on?" Jenny asked gently. "Yeah, but she insists everything's fine," Ryan muttered, frustration flickering across his face. He leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming against the table. "Maybe it's just a rough patch. We'll pull through." He tried to sound hopeful, but Jenny wasn't convinced. 4 days, she couldn't shake their conversation from her mind. Lauren had always been so lively, so full of energy, and her relationship with Ryan had seemed rock solid. Something didn't add up. Was Ryan holding something back? Or was there more to the story than he realized? She and Lauren weren't particularly close, but they got along well enough. If there was something deeper going on, Jenny felt she needed to find out, not just for Ryan's sake, but for her own peace of mind. The key was to approach it carefully. A few days later, Jenny found herself in the neighborhood where Lauren's office was located. It was the perfect excuse. She had borrowed some books from Lauren and figured she'd return them. In truth, she had a sinking feeling in her gut, a suspicion she couldn't ignore. Midday, she stepped into Lauren's office, but Lauren was nowhere to be found. A colleague mentioned that she had gone out for lunch. Jenny left the books on Lauren's desk and headed back to her car. She wasn't ready to leave just yet. Sitting in her car, flipping through radio stations absent-mindedly, she happened to glance up, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Lauren was walking down the sidewalk, arm in arm with a man Jenny didn't recognize. Their body language was unmistakably intimate, far too close for just friends. Jenny felt her breath hitch. She wasn't sure what to think, until the moment Lauren's gaze lifted and met hers. The change in Lauren was instant. Her expression faltered, and she abruptly let go of the man's arm, as if burned. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by something more guarded. Then, almost too casually, Lauren raised her wrist and tapped her watch as if to say, "I'm in a hurry. We'll talk later." Without another word, she disappeared into the building, the man following closely behind. Jenny sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing. So this was why Lauren had been so distant with Ryan. This was why she had been working late, why she had been so exhausted and on edge. She wasn't just busy, she was seeing someone else. Ryan loved Lauren too much to even suspect something like this, and that made it all the more urgent. He deserved to know the truth. Without hesitation, Jenny started her car and drove straight to his workplace. The moment she saw him, the words spilled out of her in a whirlwind of emotion. She told him everything: the man, the way Lauren had reacted, the unmistakable look of guilt on her face. But Ryan didn't seem as shaken as she expected. Instead, he crossed his arms, shaking his head. "Jenny," he said slowly, "you've been saying for a while now that your eyesight's getting worse and that you need new glasses. Maybe you saw it wrong. You said yourself they were a bit far from you." Jenny's stomach churned. Of all the things he could have said, this was the last thing she expected. She clenched her jaw, barely able to contain her frustration. "Ryan, I'm telling you exactly what I saw. It's your call what to do with it." Her voice was tight, clipped. Without another word, she turned on her heel and left. Her brother's dismissive attitude infuriated her, but later that night, much later, she couldn't help but wonder if her words had begun to sink in. Ryan's call came unexpectedly. His voice, usually warm and easygoing, carried an edge Jenny had rarely heard before. "Hey, can you describe the guy you saw with Lauren?" he asked, his tone uncharacteristically serious. Jenny sat up straighter. Yeah. He was really tall, had blonde curly hair, and was wearing a navy blue suit that day." There was a pause before Ryan muttered a quiet, "Thanks," and then hung up without another word. Jenny stared at her phone, unease settling in her stomach. Something about the way he spoke, so direct, almost cold, left her with a bad feeling. Ryan never reacted like this unless something was seriously wrong. A week passed. Jenny heard nothing from him, and Lauren, too, remained silent. Whenever she texted Ryan, all she got in response was a short, "We'll talk later." At first, she tried to be patient. Maybe he needed space. But as the days stretched on, the worry gnawed at her. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to know what was going on. She called him. To her relief, he picked up immediately, his voice steady. "Hey, come over." The moment Jenny stepped into his place, she knew. The apartment felt empty. Not just physically, but emotionally. Some of the furniture was missing, the usual warmth drained from the space. There was an eerie quiet, a stillness that hadn't been there before. Ryan gave her a half-hearted smile. "I'm doing great," he said, but the words rang hollow. Then he exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "I'm getting a divorce." Jenny's stomach dropped. Even though she had suspected it, hearing it confirmed sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. "So it was true," she murmured. "My suspicions, they turned out to be right." Ryan nodded, then gestured for her to sit. He leaned back in his chair, staring at his hands for a moment before finally telling her everything. That same night Jenny had come to his office with her story. Lauren had arrived home from work late, just like always. She had seemed exhausted, distracted. She tossed her purse aside and went straight to brush her teeth, leaving her phone unattended. Then a message lit up the screen. "Thanks for tonight." Ryan felt his blood turn to ice. Heart pounding, he quickly saved the sender's number and ran it through a messaging app. Within seconds, a profile appeared. A tall, blonde, curly-haired man. Exactly as Jenny had described. From that moment on, everything unraveled. It didn't take long for Ryan to get the full story. The next evening, he followed Lauren after work, keeping a quiet distance. And there she was, with him. Their body language, their stolen glances, the way she leaned into him, it was all the confirmation he needed. He didn't confront them. He didn't cause a scene. He simply observed. Then, he went home. And he packed her things. When Lauren finally walked through the door that night, she found her belongings stacked neatly by the entrance. Confusion flickered across her face before panic set in. She denied everything. She swore up and down that people were trying to slander her, that she was just overworked, that she was still completely devoted to him. Ryan listened. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her the photo he had taken of her and her colleague. That shut her up immediately. Jenny sat there, stunned. "Wow! I can't believe she actually did that," she whispered. Ryan let out a low chuckle, though there was no real humor in it. "What about the other guy?" Jenny asked. "Did you confront him?" Ryan smirked faintly. "I didn't have to. I let their boss know. Turns out, their company doesn't take too kindly to office affairs." He leaned back, stretching out his arms. "Oh, and I told the guy's wife too." Jenny blinked. "Wait, he's married?" "Yup," Ryan said simply. A heavy silence settled between them before Jenny finally spoke. I can't believe all of this. And I can't believe you had to go through it." Ryan met her gaze, his expression softer now. "Honestly, I probably wouldn't have gone through with it, at least not for a long time, if it weren't for you. You forced me to see what I didn't want to believe." She swallowed hard. "Sometimes," Ryan continued, "when you're so wrapped up in what you want to be true, you need someone to pull you out of it. Someone who actually gives a damn about honesty. Loyalty." He shook his head. "Not a lot of people value that anymore. But I'm lucky to have someone who does." Jenny felt her throat tighten. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, letting the weight of everything settle. It had been a painful, messy, and heartbreaking week, but in the end, the truth had come to light. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward something better.